It is fascinating how the coronavirus crisis has impaled the church on the horns of an apparently irresolvable dilemma. On the one hand, God tells us to love each other, and that means that we have to get personally involved in each other's lives. On the other hand, we're being called out by the crowd outside of the church, telling us to keep away from being together for fear of causing more infections and potentially death. So the church leaders at large have been telling us that the greatest act of love that the church can offer to the world today is for us to keep away from each other. Now that sounds like a compelling argument. On the one hand, it can win us some good press from the people who are watching the church from the outside, because here we'll come across as genuinely loving. On the other hand, it can make us feel a lot better about ourselves because there's an element of self-sacrifice. If we keep away from each other, don't do what we normally do, we give up something that we think we could be doing otherwise. The invocation for us to keep away from each other sounds compelling, except that it is based on the false view of reality. It cannot deliver what it promises. Think about it. We live in the world that is saturated with pathogens. We have viruses and bacteria by the millions on us and within us. We can't escape from this world. I couldn't tell you whether I had coronavirus already or not. That's because most people who have the virus are asymptomatic. So I can't tell whether I had it. I couldn't tell you whether I'm having it now for the very same reason. And then when I think about tomorrow, I'm not sure whether I'm not going to get it in the course of even recording this by touching something or there being something in the air. It gets worse from there. It's not only that I cannot tell whether I had it, have it, or will have it, but the other day I called my doctor and I asked him whether I could get actually a test for the antibodies, just to check if I already have immunity to the virus. He told me that here in Canada, the government is not offering such tests as of yet. But then he added, that really wouldn't help you much. That's because viruses mutate at an alarming rate. And so having antibodies to one kind of virus, one strain of coronavirus, does not prevent you from being immune against a mutation of that virus. So you see, it's not only that I could have it or had it or will have it, but I could have it time and time again. So we live in reality in which I can never be sure that I cannot be a source of infection for someone else. So there's no way for us to eradicate the virus from existence. No way for me to guarantee that the virus is not somewhere in me or on me, that I will not be a source of infection. So now when we come to the question of meeting or not meeting together, notice that if such is the case and every single one of us is in the same situation, in the same condition, deferring our meetings by a week or a month or a year will not really change anything. It's simply kicking the can down the road with the hope that something will change. What it actually does is it creates a false sense of security. Because somehow it gives people the idea that if we just add more time to the equation, that will help to solve our problem. But adding time doesn't solve anything. It leaves us in the same situation, same condition in which we were before. You see, if you now think about the church and its responsibility to people around us, we are supposed to build the church, build life on the foundation of truth. Truth means telling it like it is. So creating a delusion that then is fueled by propaganda that somehow if we delay our meetings will solve the problem of potential infections and deaths is to give the world a false sense of security. is to build reality on something that does not correspond to it. It is to falsify life. So we can't really do it. But of course, the argument doesn't stop here. If you want to determine the validity of the argument that we should stop meeting together, stop being personally involved in one another's lives out of love, you need to push that argument to its logical conclusions. You see, since I can never guarantee that will be virus-free, so I will always potentially be able to actually infect other people. The only way for me to eradicate that danger from existence is for me to take myself out of it. Really, the most loving act then that I can think of toward other people in order to prevent being the source of infection is for me to cease to be. When I take myself out, then I can no longer infect other people. That's true of me, that's true of every other person who could potentially infect other people. And so if you follow the flow of the argument, to the end, what the argument demands is that we simply take ourselves out of life in order to save life. Notice the absurdity of this conclusion. That in order to preserve life, we'd have to destroy it. This is the case of the cure being worse than the disease. But then you remember that this argument hinges on love. It is out of love that we're supposed to stop meeting together, stop being personally involved in each other's lives. But notice, if you follow that argument to its logical conclusion and out of love, to preserve life, we all have to take our lives. At the end, you're just left with the one person in the world. The person who cannot infect anybody else. But it's also that one person that cannot be loved or love anyone. So that call for us to stay away, just in case we become a source of infection and potentially death for others. If you push that argument to its limit, you end up actually denying love. Because the idea was that the most loving thing that we could do for the world is actually to take ourselves out. But when we do, when everybody does, we're left there without ability to love. In the end, we destroy love in the name of love. Look, I know that what I'm saying sounds to you like a case of philosophical sophistry, playing with words, twisting ideas, but it isn't. It is just an attempt at taking seriously a prescription for a theology that is to define the life of the church in the midst of pandemic. When these calls come out, they sound plausible, almost infectious. There's a sentiment in there where we tie love to something that we're supposed to do. And it's hard not to jump on the wagon and follow it. But we can't build the life of the church on sentiment. We cannot build it on propaganda that would improve our image, in the eyes of people looking at the church from the outside, or make us feel better on the inside. What we need to do is to build the life of the church on sound biblical theology. And the only way to determine the truth of a claim, validity of a statement, is to follow it to its logical conclusions and to see that if that cry for us to do the most loving thing today, by not being together, by keeping away from being personally involved in each other's lives, then if you were to take that to its end, you discover that you'd have to destroy life in the name of preserving it, and eradicate love in the name of doing it out of love. In short, the idea that if we really love the people who are outside of the church. We have to stop being the church is false. The only hope for a dying world is a living church. And the church lives when we dare to love each other by getting our hands dirty in each other's lives. After all, it is into our kind of world, a sin-sick world, that God sent His Son. When He came, He didn't just get His hands dirty. He got His hands pierced by rusty nails to give us life, to save us not only from disease, but to save us from sin.